My husband forgot my birthday. Again. So I got dressed, left the house, and celebrated without him. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't remind him. I felt calm, almost curious. And before you decide what kind of woman that makes me, let me ask you to stay with me for a minute. Not because I need sympathy, but because this story might make you uncomfortable in ways you don't expect. I'm not telling you this to prove a point. I'm telling you because the moment he realized what I'd done, everything between us finally became clear. It was a Thursday, late spring, the kind of morning that feels ordinary enough to hide important things. I woke up before my alarm, like I usually did, and lay there for a moment listening to the house breathe. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing somewhere outside. My husband's back turned to me, his phone charging on the nightstand, screen dark. I checked the time, then the date. I remember thinking, okay, let's see what happens today. That thought surprised me, not because I expected disappointment, but because I didn't feel anxious about it. No tight chest, no rehearsed excuses for him, just a quiet awareness, like watching weather roll in from far away. He got up 20 minutes later, kissed my cheek on autopilot, asked if I wanted eggs or toast. I said toast. He scrolled through his phone while the bread burned slightly in the toaster. The smell lingered. He didn't notice. I watched him carefully, but not hopefully. There's a difference. Hope leans forward. I was leaning back. He talked about work, a meeting that ran long, a guy in accounting who never pulled his weight. I nodded in the right places, smiled when expected. He grabbed his keys, said he'd be home late, and walked out the door. No pause, no second glance, no hey, isn't today. The door clicked shut behind him, and that was it. Here's the part that might confuse you. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt done. Not in an explosive way. Not in a dramatic, slam the door, throw the ring way. It was quieter than that. More final. Like a decision that had been waiting patiently for me to notice it. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the faint smear of butter on the counter. Then I laughed. Once. Softly. Not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. Third year in a row. I didn't grab my phone to text him. I didn't call my best friend to vent. I didn't sit down and cry into my coffee. Instead, I went upstairs. I took a shower. Let the water run hotter than usual. I shaved my legs, which I hadn't planned on doing. I dried my hair instead of throwing it into a messy bun. I opened my closet and chose a dress I usually saved for special occasions. I remember thinking, well, this is one. As I zipped it up, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked steady, not angry, not broken, just clear-eyed, like someone who had finally stopped asking the wrong questions. I left the house around noon. When I came back that night, the lights were on. His car was in the driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. He looked up at me, took in my hair, my dress, the faint smile I hadn't bothered to wipe off. And he froze, not confused, not defensive, frozen. That was the moment everything shifted. If you're expecting a revenge story, this isn't it. If you're waiting for screaming or slammed doors, you won't find them here. But if you've ever wondered what happens when someone stops begging to be seen and simply chooses to see themselves instead, then stay with me. Because once you understand why I walked out that door without a word, you'll understand why there was no going back. Before that day, I would have told you my life was stable. Not exciting in a movie trailer way, but solid, predictable. The kind of life people nod approvingly at when you describe it. My husband and I had been together since our early 20s. We met when everything still felt negotiable: careers, cities, identities. We grew up alongside each other, or at least that's what I believed. We married young enough that people warned us, but old enough to think we were the exception. We lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. White siding, a small porch, hydrangeas I kept meaning to trim. Inside, everything had a place. Shoes by the door, keys in a bowl, bills on the fridge held up by a magnet from a beach trip years ago. It wasn't passionate or poetic, but it was ours. Our routines were comfortable. Coffee together most mornings. Dinner on the couch more often than the table. Sunday grocery trips where we argued lightly about brands and always forgot one thing. We didn't fight much. That used to make me proud. I thought it meant we were doing something right. Looking back, I understand that silence can look a lot like peace if you don't listen too closely. I believed in him. In us. I believed love was something you built quietly, brick by brick, even when the excitement faded. Especially when it faded. I believed showing up mattered more than grand gestures. That people forgot things sometimes, not because they didn't care, but because life was heavy. So when my birthday slipped by the first time, I laughed it off. He was stressed, busy. He apologized later that night when he realized, said he felt terrible, promised he'd make it up to me. He did. Dinner, flowers, a little guilt that felt sincere enough. The second time, it stung more. But again, I explained it away. Another rough week, another oversight, another apology. This time a little less panicked, a little more defensive. Still, I told myself it wasn't a measure of my worth. Just a date. Just a mistake. What I didn't say out loud, what I barely admitted to myself, was that I had started reminding him in small ways. Mentioning it casually, leaving the calendar open on the counter, talking about plans weeks ahead of time. I told myself it was practical, not needy. I didn't want to be the woman who kept score. Our relationship, on the surface, looked unchanged. We still laughed, still shared a bed, still made plans for the future in broad, safe language. Vacations we might take, renovations we might do, children we might have someday when things settled down. But something subtle had shifted inside me. I started noticing pauses where there hadn't been pauses before. The way he'd half listen when I spoke. The way his phone seemed to demand more of his attention than I did. The way certain questions got brushed aside instead of answered. Nothing dramatic. Just gaps. I told myself every relationship has seasons. That closeness ebbs and flows. That love matures into something quieter. I was proud of how reasonable I was being. How understanding. How low maintenance. That pride kept me from asking harder questions. There was one moment, months before my birthday, that I think about now. We were at a friend's dinner party. Someone asked him how long we'd been married. He hesitated. Just a second too long. Then answered correctly and laughed it off. No one else noticed. I did. I remember brushing it aside with a smile that felt practiced. Telling myself I was overthinking. That it meant nothing. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to become someone who searched for cracks instead of standing on the foundation. But that hesitation stayed with me. Now let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. By the time my birthday came around again, I had already learned how to quiet that feeling. I had learned how to make myself smaller around it. How to accept less without calling it that. So when that Thursday morning arrived, I wasn't shocked by his silence. I was prepared for it. I just didn't know yet what it would cost him, or what it would finally give back to me. The days leading up to my birthday felt strangely slow. Not heavy, exactly. Just stretched, like time was waiting for something to happen and refusing to rush it along. I noticed everything more than usual. The way my husband's schedule had become unpredictable. Late meetings that couldn't be moved. Phone calls taken in the garage. Texts he answered with his back turned to me, body angled away in a way that felt instinctive rather than intentional. None of it was enough to accuse. That's what made it unsettling. I told myself I was projecting. That once you notice one crack, you start seeing them everywhere. I didn't want to become paranoid. I didn't want to be unfair. So I did what I'd gotten very good at. I waited. The night before my birthday, we sat on opposite ends of the couch. A show played that neither of us was really watching. I remember thinking he might say something at the last minute. A hint. A smile. A question about tomorrow. He didn't. Instead, he stood up, stretched, and said he had an early morning. He kissed the top of my head, quick, distracted, and went upstairs. I stayed where I was for a while after that, listening to the muffled sounds of him moving around above me, a drawer opening, the bed creaking, his footsteps fading. I checked my phone. No messages from him. No reminder set. Nothing. That was the first moment I felt something shift from sadness into clarity. The morning itself was almost surreal. Ordinary to the point of being cruel. Sunlight through the kitchen window. Birds outside. The same mug, the same coffee, the same routine we'd repeated hundreds of times. Except this time, I didn't help him remember. I didn't say, "Do you know what today is?" I didn't joke about cake or candles. I didn't wait for him to surprise me. I watched, and in watching, I started noticing details I had ignored before. How he didn't glance at the calendar. How his voice stayed flat, uncurious. How his goodbye felt rehearsed, like muscle memory instead of intention. When the door closed behind him, I stood still, letting the quiet settle. I thought about the other times, about how much effort I had put into making his life smooth, remembering his deadlines, planning his celebrations, protecting him from discomfort. I wondered, for the first time, what would happen if I stopped. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother, then my sister, then a couple of friends. Simple messages, hearts, cake emojis, proof that the date existed in the world, even if it didn't in my home. Each message landed differently than I expected. They didn't make me feel loved. They made me feel exposed. Because suddenly there was a contrast I couldn't unsee. By noon, something else had joined the mix. Suspicion. Not dramatic suspicion. Not the kind that sends you digging through phones or tracking locations. It was quieter. A pattern recognition. A question forming without words. How could someone forget something this consistently? Once is an accident. Twice is a lapse. 3 times starts to feel like a choice. I walked through the house, touching things. The back of a chair. The edge of the counter. Objects that had witnessed our life together. I tried to remember the last time he'd done something thoughtful without being prompted. It took longer than it should have. That's when my instincts fully woke up. Not screaming. Not panicking. Just alert. I opened the shared calendar on the fridge. My birthday was circled. My handwriting. From weeks ago. I remembered writing it, hoping he'd notice. He must have. Which meant this wasn't forgetfulness. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It settled into me slowly, like a weight finding its proper place. I didn't know yet what it meant, but I knew it mattered. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the empty chair across from me, the one he usually sat in. I imagined him there, looking at me, telling me he was sorry. I imagined myself accepting it. For the first time, the image felt wrong. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted him right then, or waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I really want to know. I chose to wait, not because I was afraid, but because something told me the truth was already moving toward me, and I wanted to see it clearly when it arrived. Waiting changes the way you see things. Once you stop trying to fix the moment, or soften it, or explain it away, details start arranging themselves differently. Patterns get louder. Silence starts talking back. That afternoon, after I left the house to celebrate on my own, I didn't rush home. I let the day unfold without him. I ate slowly. I walked longer than planned. I let myself exist without checking my phone every few minutes to see if he'd noticed my absence. He didn't call. He didn't text. Not once. By the time I drove back that evening, the calm I'd felt earlier had thinned into something sharper. Not anger, awareness, the kind that doesn't let you turn away anymore. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was already there. Lights on inside. For a moment, I considered turning around. Not out of fear, but because I already knew this conversation wouldn't be the one I'd been rehearsing for years. I walked in. That's when I saw his face change. The way his eyes tracked my dress, my hair, the fact that I hadn't been home waiting. "What? Where were you?" he asked. It was a neutral question. Too neutral. "I went out," I said. No edge. No accusation. He frowned, confused now. Why? I took off my shoes slowly, hung my coat, gave myself time to notice how my hands weren't shaking. It was my birthday. The silence that followed wasn't guilt. It wasn't panic. It was calculation. Oh, he said, too quickly. Right. Today got away from me. That was the moment something inside me cracked open completely. Because as he spoke, his phone buzzed on the table. He didn't look at it right away. That hesitation told me more than the message ever could. Then he glanced down, just long enough for his expression to shift again, this time into something guarded. I didn't ask. I didn't move. I just watched. He picked it up and turned it face down. I was going to say something when I got home, he added. I swear. I nodded. Not because I believed him, because I wanted him to keep talking. But he didn't. He stood there, waiting for me to react the way I always did. To rescue him from discomfort. To minimize the moment. I didn't. Eventually, he muttered something about needing a shower and walked past me. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the phone he'd left behind. I'd never gone through his messages before. I'd always believed that if you reached that point, something was already broken. But standing there, I realized something important. It was already broken. I was just finally looking at the pieces. I picked up the phone. There it was, a notification preview. A name I didn't recognize. A heart emoji I definitely hadn't sent. I didn't scroll wildly. I didn't dig like someone desperate for proof. I opened the thread calmly, like I already knew what I'd find. Weeks of messages. Casual at first, then familiar, then intimate in a way that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with emotional replacement. Inside jokes. Complaints about work. Comments about me, nothing cruel, but dismissive. As if I were a background character in my own marriage. Then the one that made my chest go tight. I wish I could have seen you today. Sent that afternoon. I sat down because my legs finally gave out. This wasn't just forgetting my birthday. This was him remembering someone else instead. I need you to understand, this wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life collapsing. Have you ever been blindsided like this? If you've been there, share your story below. We heal better together. What hurt most wasn't the messages themselves. It was the clarity they brought. The way everything suddenly made sense. The distance. The distraction. The repeated forgetting. He hadn't been careless. He had been elsewhere. When he came back into the room, towel around his neck, he stopped when he saw me sitting there with his phone in my hand. For the first time that night, his face showed real fear. I looked up at him and said, quietly, "How long?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then sat down across from me. And in that moment, before he answered, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid of what he was about to say. I was grieving what I already knew was gone. He didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands together, stayed at the floor, took a breath like he was preparing for impact. "A few months," he said finally. "Not years. Not a one-time mistake. Long enough to matter. Short enough that he probably thought it could still be managed." I nodded once. He rushed to explain. Not loudly, not angrily, carefully. He talked about feeling disconnected, about stress, about how it just happened. He said it wasn't physical, like that detail was supposed to soften the blow. He said he never meant to hurt me. I let him talk, because something strange had happened while I was sitting there. The pain had peaked and then leveled out. What replaced it wasn't numbness. It was distance. The kind you get when you finally stop standing in the middle of the fire. As he spoke, I saw our marriage clearly for the first time. Not the version I'd defended to friends. Not the one I'd been loyal to out of habit. The real one, uneven, quietly one-sided, held together mostly by my effort. When he finished, he looked at me like he was waiting for a verdict. I didn't give him one. Instead, I asked, "Did you plan to tell me?" He hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. I stood up. My movements felt deliberate, controlled, not rushed. I told him I needed space. Not to think, my thinking was already done, but to act. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not as a punishment, as a boundary. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. He tried to bridge the gap with apologies and promises, but they floated in the air between us, unanchored. I listened, but I didn't absorb them. Words had lost their weight. In that silence, I started planning. Not revenge, not exposure, something more precise. I reviewed bank accounts, copied documents, scheduled an appointment with a lawyer, not to file immediately, but to understand my options. Knowledge is a form of control, and I needed it back. At the same time, I paid attention to my emotions, not to drown in them, but to understand them. I realized I wasn't angry about the other woman. I was angry about the erasure, about being slowly edited out of my own life while still being expected to perform it. One evening, he asked if we could work on things. The phrase sounded vague enough to mean nothing. I asked him one question in return. What exactly are you asking me to forgive? He couldn't answer without minimizing, so I didn't answer him at all. That was the moment I chose myself. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. I stopped filling the space, stopped reminding him of what needed doing, stopped cushioning his mistakes. I let the consequences land where they belonged, and something interesting happened. Without my emotional labor, the house felt different, colder, more honest. He noticed it too. You could see it in the way he moved around me, unsure, like someone who had lost a map he didn't realize he was using. I didn't tell him my plan. I didn't threaten. I didn't demand. I prepared. I updated my resume, reconnected with friends I'd grown distant from. I started putting money aside in an account he didn't have access to. Small steps, steady ones. Every choice I made returned a piece of myself to me. By the end of the week, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Not because I felt empowered in some cinematic way, but because staying had become more frightening than leaving. Here's where I made my choice. Do you believe in revenge or in walking away? When someone destroys your trust, what's the right move? Comment below. I want both sides. I didn't need him to understand my pain. I needed to make sure I never ignored it again. And the next step would make that impossible to forget. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't frame it as a confrontation. I simply moved. The morning I executed my decision felt different from the others. Sharper, focused. I woke up before him again, but this time with intention. I dressed carefully, not to impress, not to provoke, just to feel aligned with myself. Like my outside finally matched my inside. He was in the shower when I left the house. I didn't leave a note. I drove to the bank first, closed the joint account we'd barely touched since I opened my own, then to the storage unit where I'd quietly moved my personal documents the night before, then to my sister's apartment where a suitcase already waited. Each stop felt efficient, clean, no second guessing. By early afternoon, my phone started buzzing. Missed call, then another, then a text, "Where are you?" I didn't respond. I checked into a small hotel across town. Nothing luxurious, neutral colors, quiet hallways, a place that didn't know me as anyone's wife. I turned my phone back on only when I was ready. His messages stacked up fast. "We need to talk. Please don't do this. I made a mistake. You're overreacting. That last one didn't hurt." It clarified. I replied with one sentence, "I know." Nothing else. An hour later, he showed up at the hotel. I hadn't told him where I was, but he figured it out. He always had been good at finding answers when it inconvenienced him not to. He looked frantic, rumpled, like someone who had just realized the ground under him wasn't as solid as he thought. "Emily," he said, stepping toward me in the lobby, "you're really doing this?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a steadiness that surprised even me. Yes, that was it. No speech, no list of grievances, no explanation. He started talking quickly, words tumbling over each other. Promises, regret, plans, therapy, anything that might rewind time. I held up a hand. "This isn't about fixing," I said. "It's about stopping." He stared at me like he didn't understand the language. "This is my birthday gift to myself," I added quietly. Clarity. That's when it hit him. Not the affair. Not the separation. The loss of control. You could see it in his face as he realized I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. That the version of me who softened everything for him was gone. "This is unfair," he said, his voice breaking. I nodded. "I know." This is the moment everything changed. "Be honest. Are you rooting for me right now? Or do you think I went too far? Tell me in the comments. I can take it." He left after that. Slowly. Like someone walking away from something he thought would always be there. I went up to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. Only then did I let myself feel it. Not regret. Relief. The kind that makes your chest ache because you didn't realize how much you'd been carrying. That night, I slept alone. Deeply. Without rehearsing conversations or managing someone else's emotions. For the first time in years, the silence felt like mine. The days after felt strangely quiet, like the world had lowered its volume out of respect. I moved into my sister's place temporarily. Her apartment smelled like laundry detergent and coffee, and nothing about it belonged to my past life. That helped. I slept on her couch at first, then in the spare room once she cleared it out for me. We didn't talk much about what had happened. She didn't press. She just made space. That was enough. My husband kept reaching out. Messages that swung between remorse and frustration. Some days he sounded like he understood. Other days, like he was still trying to negotiate the version of me he preferred. I didn't respond right away. Not to punish him, but because I was finally listening to myself. I noticed how my body reacted to things now. How tension rose when I thought about going back. How calm settled in when I imagined moving forward alone. That contrast became my compass. There were losses I hadn't anticipated. Mutual friends who didn't know what to say and said nothing instead. Routines I missed more than the person. The idea of a future that had felt decided, now suddenly open and terrifying. But there were also gains. I laughed more easily. I slept through the night. I stopped bracing myself before checking my phone. I remembered things about myself I'd set aside. My love for long walks, for reading without distraction, for silence that didn't need to be filled. We met once, weeks later, to talk logistics. Papers, timelines, closure, in the practical sense. He looked different. Smaller, somehow. Like the confidence he'd worn so easily before had cracked. "I never meant to lose you," he said. I believed him. But intent doesn't undo impact. "I know," I told him. "But you did." There was no satisfaction in that moment. No victory. Just truth. As the months passed, the sharp edges dulled. Not because the betrayal disappeared, but because it no longer defined every thought. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about recentering. I stopped asking myself what I could have done differently. I stopped rewriting the story in ways that made me responsible for someone else's choices. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it the same way again. What about you? Was the pain necessary to become who you are today? Let me know below. I don't think leaving made me stronger overnight. It made me honest. And honesty, it turns out, is quieter than strength, but it lasts longer. I kept the dress I wore that day, not as a symbol of rebellion, but as a reminder of the moment I chose not to beg for recognition. Life didn't magically become easy, but it became mine again. And that made all the difference. People sometimes ask me if I hate him now. The truth is, I don't. Hate takes energy. It keeps you tethered. What I feel instead is distance, the healthy kind. The kind that lets you breathe without checking whether someone else approves of your air. What happened to me wasn't just about a forgotten birthday or an emotional affair. It was about the slow erosion of presence. About what happens when you keep making yourself smaller so someone else can stay comfortable. I learned that love isn't proven by how much you tolerate. It's proven by how much you're willing to protect yourself. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me clear. Clear about what I deserve, and clear about what I will never negotiate again. If you're listening to this and you feel that quiet discomfort in your chest, the one you keep explaining away, pay attention to it. That feeling isn't weakness. It's information. So here's my final question. Is it better to forgive and move on, or to make sure they understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emily Parker's voice travels. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to stay and fight. It's to leave quietly and finally choose yourself.